What's going on, guys? Steeler here, back again with a very short technical review of Forza Motorsport 7. Now, what does that mean? That means I'm covering the nuances that veteran racers really care about, meaning weather, tire modeling, physics, day-night cycles, and more. Now, of course, many of you know that I've got my hands on the game early through the Ultimate Edition, been playing it non-stop, and of course, I am a Forza veteran. I've also played pretty much every other sim racer out there, and I just prefer Forza Motorsport. That's just my opinion, and of course, this review is just my opinion. It's important to note that I am not using any assists whatsoever, with the exception of the braking line for a simple point of reference. I use too many cars to remember where they all brake at, so this is kind of my way of getting around that. So of course I want to tackle the physics, tire modeling, all of that good stuff, but before I do, want to tackle the single player for those that don't really care about the hardcore aspects. Of course, expect good things from the single player here. If you enjoyed any kind of single player action from Forza Motorsport in the past, you're going to like this. They've got a new car collector system where you rank up by collecting cars. Of course, the first two tiers are really easy to get through, but around tier 3, you start to, notice that, hey, it's a little bit harder to climb these ranks. Other than that, you can expect a good mixture of showcase and traditional Forza Motorsport race events. It's all good. Now, of course, that's helped by the fact that the tracks are generally pretty dynamic. You'll start out 1 minute in the daylight, and of course, before you know it, it'll be dark, and that's awesome. You never really had this experience in a Forza game before. It really helps the races feel quite different, and some of the lighting you will experience is simply mind-blowing. The game looks better than ever, and of course, as I said before, if you enjoyed any kind of Forza single-player action in the past, you're really going to enjoy this one. So I think I've made it pretty clear. The single player is good. Add to that the fact that the weather is definitely more realistic than ever. You don't hydroplane all over the place unrealistically crazy like you did before. It's much more forgiving, much more fun. I think people enjoy the rain racing several times more than they did in Forza Motorsport 6. It's definitely a good time, but I want to get into the physics, and before I do, I gotta say, guys, I've got some some very important announcements about this game, some things you need to change in the options menu to get this game to be better, in my opinion. The camera shake, all of that stuff can be changed. If you don't like that kind of stuff, you can change it, so stay tuned. Towards the end of the video, I'll show you how to get to that and change it if you're not familiar with the menu system and all that good stuff. Now, as we get into the physics and tire modeling of Forza Motorsport 7, I need you to keep something in the back of your mind. As I've stated before, I am a Forza veteran. I prefer Forza. I've played pretty much every other sim racer out there on PC and console, but I still come back to Forza. I still think Forza has the best physics and tire modeling in any racing game around, despite Forza Motorsport 6's problems, such as inherent understeer and lack of low-speed corner and grip. I still thought overall the physics model there was the best. I think Forza Motorsport 7 is quite a bit better, and it does this in a few different ways. For one, the game just gives the player a lot more feedback when driving, both visually with the car's on-screen actions and of course through haptic feedback. Put simply, the cars are just much more predictable. Unlike this skybox, I did not expect to see such phenomenal lighting in this game. The skyboxes, the lighting, the HDR, all of it's phenomenal. I was having a really hard time driving this lap because I kept looking at the background. These massive hills on Spa have never been so apparent to me with this ridiculously gorgeous lighting rolling over them. It's something to expect because there's a ton of phenomenal looking lighting and skyboxes in this game. Of course, I digress. Of course, the other way the cars just handle better is just the fact that they just handle better. There's more on-edge grip, and of course, as I said before, the cars are more predictable. There's less understeer in these cars. So as I mentioned before, by comparison, Forza Motorsport 6 had much more understeer built into the physics model of that game. I know this because I raced this exact same McLaren F1 in Forza 6 right before I booted up Forza 7. I noticed quite a bit more understeer. There was good grip in both games, but Forza 7 has much less built-in understeer, if that makes sense, because you could tune that out in Forza 6 pretty easily, really. And it definitely has more low-speed grip, especially in GT3 cars, stuff like that. I feel like a lot of that's been remedied. So the physics all around are much better. Now, of course, add to that what you've seen this whole race in the McLaren, these dynamic day-night cycles, and even the weather. It's pretty awesome. As you saw, the first lap was pretty much dusk. It looked phenomenal. The second lap is pretty much pitch black on most of the track. And all of this stuff, the day-night, the weather, scales with the amount of laps you decide to do. So, of course, if you're doing a 2 or 3 lap race, you might only have 1 lap of each condition. If you're doing a 30-lap race, you're going to have several laps of each condition. It's going to feel definitely much more realistic and dynamic in that way. And, of course, like I said, that's worth considering. It doesn't just stick and not scale with the amount of laps that you're doing. Now, of course, as I said before, the wet weather racing is definitely much better than it's ever been in Forza Motorsport 6. The aquaplaning is definitely more realistic. Everything about it's more realistic. It's definitely more enjoyable as a result, and as you see here, it took me a minute to kind of get used to it, but it's just more fun. That's the bottom line. It's just more fun. It feels more dynamic. There's fog now. It's just more immersive, and as a result, I'm not groaning when a rain track comes up in multiplayer, so it just feels better. That's kind of my take on the rain in the game. Now, there is a ton of content in Forza Motorsport 7. There is no arguing that the game brings a lot of content, and in fact, it is by far the largest Forza Motorsport ever. Not only that, the best handling, the most immersive. Day-night cycles are almost perfect. The wet weather racing is almost perfect. The physics are the best that they've ever been. There's just a lot to like. The driver suits even are actually really cool. When I started looking at them, I was like, man, that looks awesome. I didn't even really care for this particular version of the game as much as this one, but I really like the suit. Maybe I want to wear the suit. It really got me thinking about some of that stuff. Surprisingly, there's just a lot of diversity there, but of course, there are some bad things about the game as well. And we can start with the fact that there is no test drive shortcut button in the upgrades menu. Yes, you heard me right. You can no longer hit a button on your controller while you're upgrading your car and go to test drive to tune the car on track. Yes, that is gone. And of course, if you're not a tuner, if you don't care about this stuff, it doesn't pertain to you. Ignore this part of the video. But to a lot of us, it's what kept me engaged in Forza Motorsport for as long as I have been. This is a quintessential feature that I never thought would ever be removed because it's so basic and common sense. Why is it gone? Especially after doing it for the better part of a decade, it makes absolutely zero sense. I can no longer go in to put a build on my car. I can no longer then hit a button on my controller to test drive that build and then tune right from there. It's gone. The shortcut is gone. Now, I've looked this up. I've looked everywhere. It's gone. You've now got to go to free play. You've got to load up a race with however many cars that you choose, which takes a minute. And then when that race loads, you've got to hit right bumper and go down to test drive. So free play, load, right bumper, down to test drive, then it loads that, and then you can actually tune while test driving. All instead of just hitting one button on your controller, choosing a track, going right into it with no AI. It makes no sense. Also, it's definitely the buggiest Forza at launch, and of course, it's by no means anywhere close to broken or anything. I've had a few bugs, and for Forza, that's pretty rare, especially at launch or anything. So I've had an issue where aero kits weren't showing up, had an issue where shadows were flickering in and out. Nothing game-breaking at all. But of course, it's worth mentioning, it's definitely the buggiest Forza at launch. Also, in multiplayer lobbies, it kicks you out of party chat, sends you right to game chat when you join multiplayer. That's both entering and exiting multiplayer for some glorious reason. And of course, player names are not currently showing up over cars. Only the cars are showing up over the cars, so the car names will show up. It doesn't tell you who's racing the car. Just little oddities like that, really. So other than that, guys, the homologation is going to throw some people off. You can only have so much tire width with so much horsepower in certain classes, and it's up to you to mix and match and stay in that PI range. A lot to go into there, too much for this video. But for the hardcore that like super tight competitive racing, I think a lot of people will like this. At the moment, the lobbies are very limited to certain groups of homologated cars, but I think that's because only the early edition players are playing and they want to keep that stuff pretty tight and robust racing there. But other than that, guys, I want to get into some of the stuff you really need to pay attention to. You need to consider changing these things to make your Forza Motorsport 7 experience better. And we'll start with this horrible idea that was, of course, the shaky cam You guys, I have no clue what Turn 10 was thinking here by enabling this by default. Some people might like it, but of course, if you like the camera style of every other Forza Motorsport before, go into your options, go into your HUD, and as I show here, turn shaky cam, or whatever it's called, off. Don't turn it to normal, don't turn it to simulation. Make sure it's off if you want the camera to be like it was in Forza Motorsport 6. Makes the game a lot better, in my opinion. Also, consider changing your dead zones when you first boot up this game. Go into your controller settings, and when you get to the screen you see here, hit the X button and set your sliders how I have them set. This is just my personal preference, but I feel like the game just handles and is more responsive this way. You've got better throttle control, you've got more control of your braking, and it's important to note that when you're done setting these numbers, how you see them on screen here, push the start button to save this, or it will not save your settings. You have to push that button, or else it will just go back to how it was. So it might be worth double checking after you do so. It definitely helps be more consistent, especially for newer players. More experienced guys, hey, it might not affect you at all, but it's just how I like to run things. So the video turned out to be a bit longer than I expected it to be, but of course I hope you guys learned something today. If you did, please hit that like button, show your support. I appreciate it. You know, if I had to sum it up, guys, I'm really impressed with the handling model. The tire model is great. Definitely more grip on the edge. Seems like you got more traction all around. Much less understeer. More low-speed corner and grip, especially in race cars. Definitely something that needed to be fixed, and it has been. The skyboxes and visuals are pretty much second to none, in my opinion. The game is just AAA to the max, full of content, and that's great. I really like what I'm seeing here, but of course keep in mind there are some changes that have never been in Forza Motorsport before, like the homologation system. There's just not enough out there yet to really say anything definitively on it. Right now the hoppers are very limited to keep the small amount of pre-release players busy racing, but of course upon full release we'll know more. Also, the lack of a test drive shortcut in the upgrade menu is absolutely inexcusable. That needs to be fixed. If you agree, please tweet at Turn10. Tell them to put a test drive shortcut back in the upgrade menu. It needs to be there for tuners. If it's that much less convenient, it's just that much less fun, in my opinion. But of course, great game. Can't give it a score because, of course, I just don't know enough about the multiplayer at the moment. But I want to get a lot of this out there for you guys. I got too many questions to ignore. I appreciate the support for those that stuck around. And of course, subscribe if you're into this kind of stuff, Xbox news, tech news, stuff like that. Of course, I'm Dealer. Thanks for the support. I'm out.